Hello, this video is about establishing the diffraction conditions for crystals and introducing the reciprocal lattice. So at first I will present some tools used to describe the crystals. So it's a kind of reminder, like it's better if you know already what Bravais lattices are. Then I will introduce Bragg and Laue conditions of diffractions. We will see that the reciprocal lattice will emerge naturally as a consequence of the Laue condition. We will discuss the reciprocal lattice and its relation to plane waves and Fourier space. And we will also discuss the significance of the Brillouin zone. For this lecture, you need to know what waves are, and in particular electromagnetic waves. It's better if you know also what Fourier series are. I used some references in this slide, so the famous Kittel book and Ashcroft-Mermin book. I also used a more recent book, Hoffman. It's a small book, concise. And also another recent book, Simon from Oxford University Press. But mostly I would say the Hoffman is, I use the Hoffman quite a lot, mostly in these slides. And of course some pictures or some ideas from some internet sites that I try to, I hope I cited all of them when I use. To begin with, let's see a reminder of Bravais lattices. So Bravais established that there are in 3 dimensions 14 lattices that are sufficient to explain to describe any crystals. So let's see some definitions. The first one is a little bit philosophical. It's an infinite array of discrete points with an arrangement and orientation that appears exactly the same from whichever of the points the array is viewed. So here orientation is also important. So for example, you imagine you have an array of points in front of you, and you go to one of the points and you look around you, and for example you take a 360-degree picture. Now it's possible with new fancy cameras. And then you jump to another point and you again take the same 360-degree picture, and it should look exactly the same as that you took just before. So in other words, all these lattice points are equivalent. Okay, so this is what the first definition says. The second definition is more mathematical, easy to use in maths. So a 3D Bravais lattice consists of all points with position or lattice. So we will often use the word lattice vectors. R. So R usually in my slides bold means vectors. Okay, so this is R. Just it's a vector connecting any 2 points belonging to the lattice. So that vector can be written as a linear combination of 3 non-collinear vectors. Not any 3 vectors, not all in the same plane. And n1, n2, n3 are any integers. So integers and any. Any is also important. If taking a set of integers and you start from one lattice point and you realize that you don't get to another lattice point, then this is not a Bravais lattice. So now let's construct a crystal from a lattice. So we've seen what is a lattice. A crystal is lattice plus a basis. So what this means is that we define a basis, or in 2D sometimes it is referred to as a motif, like for wallpapers. So in this case, let's say we have two atoms, one red, colored red, and one colored blue, and the crystal can be made by attaching to each point of the lattice one basis. And this is what we get in this case. So let's now define primitive vectors and primitive cells. So we can take here the example in 2 dimensions of this set of points, which represent a lattice. As we have seen before, any lattice vector R can be written like this, and we can use primitive vectors for A1 and A2. So these are possible primitive vectors, A1, A2. Here you see that this applying this formula with any integers will build in some sense the lattice. If you start from that point and use any integers with A1, A2, you can access to any of these points. Alright, so this is a possibility for A1, A2. You see that this could be also a possibility. A1, for example, here, A2 there. A1 here, A2 there. So there are different possibilities. But usually we take the shortest ones. So in this case, these are the shortest. Primitive cell. It's a parallelepiped formed by the primitive vectors, chosen that its volume V is the smallest possible. So it contains one lattice point. So this is a possible unit cell, primitive cell, which is called also unit cell. So the primitive cell is in fact a unit cell that have only one lattice point. So you see here that in fact it does contain only one lattice point, because you consider only the portion of the point that is inside here plus what is inside here plus this piece plus this piece. So the sum of the 4 contributions is 1. Actually, the number of points can be used to quantify the volume of the cell. Alright, because it just have 1 point, so the volume of this cell, for example, is 1 point. It is not unique, but its volume stays the same. So indeed, if you take this cell, again you have 1 point inside, and so same volume, and it works. So it is also a possible unit cell. Same for this one. It fills the space when translated for all the Bravais lattice vectors R without overlapping or leaving any voids. So indeed, if you take this one and you translate it by vector A1, so it will become here this one. Okay, you can continue in this direction and make this line. You can then do a translation by A2. So this cell will become this one, and you see that you can in fact tile the space, fill the space without leaving any voids and without any overlapping. The volume of the cell, so this is given by mathematics. This is geometry, so in 1D it is just the length of the vector. 2D you have the cross product, and here this product. So we have seen that the unit cell is not unique. However, it would be convenient to have a unique way of defining a unit cell, especially if you are talking on the phone with a co-worker or something. You would like to be sure that you are talking about the same thing. So anyway, there is a very convenient cell called the Wigner-Seitz cell. It can be constructed using a simple algorithm. So let's go through it. First, you choose any lattice site as the origin. So let's look at this 2D example. You take that point. Starting at the origin, draw vectors to all neighboring lattice points. So these are these lines, this one, etc. Construct a plane perpendicular to and passing through the midpoint of each vector. Alright, so midpoint of this would be here, and perpendicular is this. Same here, so okay. Here is a kind of problem. The drawing has a problem. It should be perpendicular like this. Same for here. It should be perpendicular. Okay, we've been through that. The area enclosed by these planes is the Wigner-site cell. So in this case, you see that it is this cell. So this is a unique way of defining a cell. These are two examples in 3 dimensions. So the cube is easy. You can realize that you get a cube. This is another Bravais lattice called the body-centered cubic. So it's a cube with an additional point at the center of the cube. And in this case, the Wigner-site cell is a kind of polyhedron. You can see it's now not a simple cube. For X-ray diffraction, we need to know what are electromagnetic plane waves. So this is a reminder. Okay, it is a transverse wave. You have the electric field and magnetic field changing in this way for a sine wave. E and B are perpendicular to each other and also to the direction of the propagation. So it is a transverse wave. So the wave changes in space and time. So we have 2 variables. 2 domains, space. The period in space is the wavelength, lambda. So distance between this and this, in this case. The period in the time domain is called t, usually. You then have the speed of rotation of the phase. So in space you have radian per meter. So this is called the wave number, usually represented as k. For the time domain, it is called the frequency or pulsation sometimes. This is omega, radian per second. So considering 1 cycle, so a 2 pi rotation of the phase, it's called the frequency. For the time, so per second or hertz. Sometimes people use k as 1 divided by lambda, but the official definition usually used is 2 pi divided by lambda for k. Okay. All right. So these are definition of k and omega. Space and time is related by the speed of the wave. So in vacuum it would be c, and of course lambda divided by t, or omega divided by k. Okay, in the real world we represent the electric field using just a sine function for the plane wave, but it is useful to use complex numbers for mathematics in particular. So we usually represent a plane wave by a vector, which could be the electric field. The function of position, of course, is equal to the amplitude, which is a vector, and a phase factor. So the phase is represented by the exponential I omega t minus kr. Kr being a scalar product of the 2 vectors. Alright, so in 1 dimension, of course, kr becomes just kx, but now we are in 2 or 3 dimensions. we use the vector k. So vector k actually also gives the propagation direction. All right. And again, omega t minus kr is the phase. Okay, so exponential, for example, if the phase is 2 pi, exponential I 2 pi is 1. If the phase is pi, you will have this exponential I pi will be minus 1. So let's move now to diffraction. So what kind of electromagnetic waves do we need to study crystals? So you know that the diffraction phenomenon occurs if when the typical distances of your system are of the same order of magnitude as the wavelengths that you use. So you have studied diffraction and interference in optics. And so for interference, for example, if you have two sources of light and their distance is not too far away compared to the wavelengths, you will get some interference on a screen, for example. So this is the case of the Young two slits interference, for example. So because the distance between the atoms in a crystal are typically of the order of 1 angstrom, we will need a wavelength of about 1 angstrom. And looking at the electromagnetic spectrum, we find out that X-rays are the electromagnetic waves corresponding to these typical wavelengths. You may use neutrons also, because the de Broglie wavelength is about 1 angstrom also. Okay, so neutrons will interact with nuclei. Okay, so however, electromagnetic waves will interact with electrons. Okay, electromagnetic waves have oscillating electric field and magnetic field, so they will interact with electrons. So electrons, okay, let's say absorbed and radiate X-rays. At least is what is commonly said. Nuclei are too heavy to respond, so only the electrons will be important. And you also have a sufficient penetration in the solid. So we have here a bulk probe. So let's see here how the experiment is actually done. Usually you have here an emitter, so a source of electromagnetic waves. So you can see here the wavefronts. Okay, constant phase planes, surfaces. So at first you may have a spherical wave if this is a point source. But very far from this emitter, the wavefronts will look like planes. So we can say we have plane waves incident on the sample. Again, you will have some spherical waves emitted from some atoms. But because we are looking very far from the sample, our wavefronts will look like planes. Therefore, we can consider plane waves coming in the detector, and these are the scattered waves. So this is named incident waves with this wave vector k, and we will look at scattered waves in the direction given by wave vector k prime. Okay, so let's now see the Bragg condition of diffraction. So just after X-rays were discovered, researchers just used them to illuminate anything they could to look what was happening. And they observed that when X-rays were going through a crystal, they were observing some patterns on a screen. And Bragg was the first to give an explanation for this phenomenon. So let's see how he explained this. So the condition for a sharp peak in the intensity of the scattered radiation was 1. The X-rays should be specularly reflected by the atoms in one plane. So already he is considering planes and not individual atoms. He decides that atoms make made some kind of planes, like this line in 2D and this one in 2D. So X-rays are reflected by planes. Second, the reflected rays from the successive planes interfere constructively. Alright, so this actually is very similar to thin film interference. You have probably studied in optics thin film interference. So let's say these are visible light, so kind of ray. So you have a ray incident here reflected by this. Let's say this is a thin film. Okay, this could be air, a film, and air, for example. So you have a first ray reflected like this, a second ray that would penetrate inside the film and would be reflected at this interface. Of course, some of the light reflected and emerging here. And these two rays would interfere at in some very long at a distance, and you would see a pattern, interference pattern on a screen. So in such a case, what you were used to do is to calculate the path difference between the two rays, between this one and this one. So in this case, the path difference would be this plus the same in the other direction. So 2 times this, in this case 2 times this length, which is d sine theta. For a thin film, you would have n, the index, refractive index, but in this case we do not, so just d sine theta. So the condition for constructive interference in this particular case would be this, 2 times this equal an integral times the wavelength, lambda. So this is the typical constructive interference condition in optics, and it's also that of Bragg. So just to mention Bragg, there was Father and son, and they both got the Nobel Prize for different things. So the son got it for this explanation. So it looks like kind of strange, because we do not have planes, we have atoms. So why we say that these X-rays are reflected by planes? So there are different problems with this. It works, no problem with that, but it's not very complete, let's say. So it looks oversimplified. First, it says nothing about the intensity and width of X-ray diffraction peaks, because it only gives a direction. So actually, the direction will be given by theta. It neglects the differences in scattering from different atoms, because it just considers planes. So what is the electronic distribution within the plane is not considered. All right. So oversimplified. Laue gave another explanation. So it is known as the Laue condition for diffraction. Here we are first looking at only 2 points, not a lattice or a crystal, just 2 points. So these 2 points are here, this one and this one, within a solid. So we have an incident wave characterized by this equation. At this stage we do not need the amplitude, so there is just the phase. So rho here is just a coordinate vector. Just it could be r, it's just a vector from a fixed origin somewhere. Okay, so we are looking in the direction given by k prime. So this would be the scattered wave, k prime. So this is the equation for the scattered wave. We have here n and n prime are unit vectors for this direction and this direction. So we would like to find out the condition for constructive interference for the rays scattered by these 2 points. So this in fact is very similar to optics. If you have the 2 slit interference scheme, for example, you would have here along this direction, you would have 2 slits, one slit here, another slit here, in this and a plate here. And then you are looking at, for example, in optics, a wave coming this way, and then you are looking in the direction given by K prime, and you are establishing the condition for constructive interference. So if you do that, it would be like considering a first ray here. So you could call that ray 1, and then another ray, ray 2, here. And so to find out the condition for constructive interference, you just need to look at the difference in optical path, and it is that length in yellow here. Okay, and these lengths are so n prime scalar r in this case, and minus n scalar r minus, because we want to keep this length positive. So another thing is that we have k equal k prime because we have elastic scattering. Alright, so this is the condition for constructive interference for the 2 points. At this time we don't need actually to say lattice, just 2 points. So the path difference is that in yellow, it is this, and for constructive interference you need this to be equal to an integral times lambda. Okay, so this is a path difference, a distance. To get the phases we need to multiply by k actually, therefore 2 pi over lambda. And this is our condition for constructive interference. So we call k prime minus k delta k. So in fact our final condition, so it's called the Laue condition for diffraction, is this. So in fact what we find here is we know r, because we know the distance between our 2 points. We know k, it is the incident wave, so we find out the k prime, so the direction corresponding to constructive interference. Alright, so the Laue conditions, like the Bragg conditions, only gives the direction in which you will have constructive interference. So what about the amplitude of scattering? So we have here X-rays, so electromagnetic waves, and we know that they interact with the electrons. Alright, so qualitatively it makes sense that the amplitude of scattering will be proportional to the electron density. Indeed, if there is no electrons, there is no scattering. So electrons will have to come in the equation. Also, we will have an effect of the phase, of course. So the phase is represented by this factor. Okay, so this phase factor is in fact the phase of the wave at this point with respect to this point. Alright. So indeed, if you have so this delta k is in fact k prime minus k. So if you have a phase difference equal to 2 pi or an integer time 2 pi, they will be in phase, and you will have constructive interference. And this will appear here because if you have delta k scalar r equal 2 pi, this exponential will be 1. Right, so it's like having let's say 1 here, and then the wave emitted here would have, for example, this factor in it, and if it is 1, then it is just 1 plus 1 plus 1 equal to constructive interference. If this delta kr equal pi, then you will have a minus 1. This will give you minus 1, so you will have a 1 minus 1 equals 0, therefore destructive interference. So to get the final amplitude, you would have to integrate this product over the whole solid. And then what you observe is in fact the intensity, and intensity is the amplitude squared. So this shows already a problem, because f can be a complex number, but the phase is eliminated when you take the intensity. But the game is to start from the intensity and get to the amplitude. But we have to guess the phase actually. Okay, so this is a different story that we will address maybe in another video. Look at this equation. You probably have seen this somewhere. It's in fact a Fourier transform. So the amplitude of diffraction is in fact the Fourier transform of the electron density. Let's now give a more accurate derivation of this amplitude of scattering. There are more or less complex ways of doing this, and it depends very much on which book you are looking at. For example, in Kittel book they don't do much. In the Hoffman book they do basically what I've just done, just maybe a little bit more. And so what I'm going to just show quickly here is the same analysis as that given in the Simon book from Oxford. So they invoke the golden rule of quantum mechanics. So we will say that the incident wave, so the wave is in quantum state given by the k vector. So the k is a interesting quantum number. Then the final state is a scattered wave, so it will be given by this, and it will be characterized by wave vector k prime. So of course you have to find the potential. So these waves are scattered by electrons. So in fact the EM waves interact with the electrons via the Coulombic potential, okay, which is proportional to the density of electrons. So what happens in quantum mechanics when you want to find the probability of transition from one quantum state to another? So in our case, from quantum state k to quantum state k prime. Okay, so in this case it is proportional to this, with using the Dirac notation. So this would be our initial state. We apply the potential, which is proportional to the density of electrons, and then we project on k prime, so the final state, and this gives you the amplitude of probability of the transition. Of course you need to have the same energy. We have the same energy for k and k prime. The two waves have the same energy. Alright, so in integral form we get this. So k is characterized by this. So rho again is a position vector, so we can write r in this case. So we have kr, and this you will have the complex conjugate of this function. So you will have minus I k prime r, so that's it, minus k prime r. Alright, so this shows how we arrive to that function for the amplitude of diffraction. In this video we will now address the direction of scattering. We will discuss the reciprocal lattice, planes, etc., like the Brillouin zone. So if you want to know more from this point about the amplitude of diffraction and intensity of diffraction, you may jump to my video discussing this. So in that video I discuss starting from this I discuss the form factor, the structure factor, and the structure determination for cubic systems. Alright, just one last comment. This is still in general. We are not talking yet about lattices. Alright, so in this other video I will just jump to lattices from this equation. Alright, so we have seen, we come back to the Laue condition, which is delta k r equal 2 pi m. So again, this is for 2 points. Alright, and so from now on we are going to look at lattices. Okay, so let's now see the Bragg condition of diffraction. So just after X-rays were discovered, researchers just used them to illuminate anything they could to look what was happening. And they observed that when X-rays were going through a crystal, they were observing some patterns on a screen. And Bragg was the first to give an explanation for this phenomenon. So let's see how he explained this. So the condition for a sharp peak in the intensity of the scattered radiation was 1. The X-rays should be specularly reflected by the atoms in one plane. So already he is considering planes and not individual atoms. He decides that atoms made some kind of planes, like this line in 2D and this one in 2D. So X-rays are reflected by planes. Second, the reflected rays from the successive planes interfere constructively. Alright, so this actually is very similar to thin film interference. You have probably studied in optics. So let's go through different definitions of the reciprocal lattice. First of all, the original Bravais lattice is called the direct lattice. So the first definition is the set of all G vectors that yield plane waves with the periodicity of a given Bravais lattice. So we are going to look at what this means, so don't worry for now. We will see that soon. We have an analytical definition, which is just the Laue condition. So it is the set of vectors R satisfying this for all R belonging to the direct lattice. And there is a convenient third definition of the reciprocal lattice shown here. So we have a set of primitive vectors A1, 2, 3 in 3 dimensions. And we can generate the primitive vectors of the reciprocal lattice B1, B2, B3 using just this set of equations. So these are very easy to remember. You have 2 pi divided by the volume being given by this. And then you see that you have B1 equal, so A2 cross A3. And then it is just a permutation. So you always have 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Alright, so it's easy to remember. If you know one, you know all the others. In 1D or 2D, you cannot get access to the third dimension using this, so you have to use this set of equations. So it's just a scalar product bi scalar a j equal 2 pi delta a j. So this is a Kronecker delta. So it is 0 if I is different of j. Alright, so you can see that a B1 will be parallel to A1, and A1, for example, will be perpendicular to A2, etc. Let's go through some properties of the reciprocal lattice. The reciprocal lattice of the reciprocal lattice is the direct lattice. So we come back. We do not get lost like in the movie Inception, where they were dreaming in their dream, etc. We come back to the reality. The reciprocal lattice is also a Bravais lattice. Anyway, any lattice should be a Bravais lattice. Just a property here, the crystal system remains the same as the direct lattice, but the Bravais lattice may be different. So we will see that with some examples. If you take the cubic system, you will see that a body-centered cubic will be transformed into an FCC, a face-centered cubic, so it stays inside the same crystal system. The dimension of the reciprocal lattice is 1 divided by length, so it's a little bit why it is called reciprocal. The volume, depending on the dimension of the primitive cell, is 2 pi power d divided by the volume in that dimension. So in one dimension it will be just 2 pi divided by the lattice constant. Alright. An important point, the Wigner-Seitz cell in the reciprocal lattice is called the first Brillouin zone. So we will see the importance of the first Brillouin zone at the end of this presentation. Let's see some simple examples in 1D and 2D. So first in 1D, so a lattice is defined, you can define mathematically a lattice by a1 equal ax. So a1 is your primitive vector, a is the lattice constant, and x would be a unit vector. So you construct your reciprocal lattice using this equation. A1 is parallel to B1. So anyway, we have only one dimension in this case. So this gives you the magnitude of B1, just 2 pi over a x. So this is a representation of these lattices. This is a direct lattice with a between the distance between 2 points, and here the reciprocal lattice with distance between 2 points being b. Right, and you have here the nice reciprocal relationship. So if a is in let's say meters, b will be in per meters. So in 2D you just do the same but with more vectors. So you have a1, a2 here. So you have lattice constant a along x, b along y, and you construct b1 and b2 using these equations. So if you have the same indices here, you will have 2 pi. If it is different, you will have 0. So these will be perpendicular and these will be parallel. And you can get the magnitude of b1 and b2 again from this one and from this one, 2 pi over a, 2 pi over b. And these are your lattices. So direct is a1, a2. You will have b1, b2. Notice that if a1 is shorter than a2, then b1 will be longer than b2. This is due to the reciprocal relationship here. Be careful, here we have taken a nice perpendicular. A2 and A1 are perpendicular. They do not need to be perpendicular. This is a rectangular lattice, but for an oblique lattice, for example, it will not be the case. So you have to compute correctly the magnitude here of these are examples in 3 dimensions. So the square lattice with the lattice parameter a will become a square lattice, no change, with lattice parameter 2 pi over a. Body-centered cubic will become a face-centered cubic with this lattice constant. Of course, FCC will be a BCC because we come back. an HCP hexagonal close packed with two lattice constant A and C will also be an HCP, but be careful. So in the vertical direction it will be of course 2 pi over C, but for the hexagonal plane it will be this. Okay, and the square root should finish at 3 here, and rotated 30 degrees about the C-axis. Let's see now the relationship between the direct lattice and the reciprocal lattice. So the first relationship, remember the first definition of the reciprocal lattice, it was related to lattice plane waves. So let's see what this is about. This equation is the equation for a plane wave of amplitude A and wave vector k. Alright, so now look at the definition of the reciprocal lattice according to Laue. So it is given by these g vectors, but this is can be regarded as the equation of a plane wave, which wave vector is g. So let's take, of course, the R here is any lattice vector. So let's construct a plane wave with wave vector g. This is it. Okay, now R is any position. Right, so this is a plane wave. Okay, amplitude 1 with a wave vector g. So let's multiply this by this, because this is 1, so it doesn't change anything. But we can rewrite it like this. So now we have exponential I, g, and r plus lattice vector. So what does it mean? If you have this is a function of r equal the same function of r plus the lattice vector. So it means this plane wave is periodic with the periodicity of the direct lattice. So in other words, the g vectors of the reciprocal lattice give plane waves in the, of course, in the direct lattice with the periodicity of the direct lattice. Alright, so you can construct plane waves using the k vectors given by the reciprocal lattice vectors. And the wavelength will be given just by 2 pi over k, that is 2 pi over g. Let's take an example in 2 dimensions using a rectangular lattice. So this is our direct lattice with a lattice constant a and b, and this is a reciprocal lattice with a lattice constant 2 pi over a and 2 pi over b. So we are going to look at different points in the reciprocal space. So we call it space because it's a set of points. Like the direct lattice, we sometimes call it direct space. So these are the points in the direct space, and we are going to look at a few points in the reciprocal space. So we define the origin here at 0. Okay, let's start with this point. So this point defines a g vector from the origin. The amplitude is 2 pi over a, and this is this can be a k vector for a plane wave. So what is the wavelength of that wave? It is just lambda equal 2 pi over g equal a, and a is the lattice constant in this direction of the direct lattice. Therefore, you can in fact write here these red lines are the wave fronts of the plane wave with wave vector g. Of course, the plane waves are, the wave fronts are perpendicular to the wave vector, so they are perpendicular to this g vector. Okay, so in fact what we have is that this is the shortest g vector in this direction. You could have taken this, the next one, but this is the shortest. Okay, so the shortest reciprocal lattice vector gives the interplanar distance of planes perpendicular to g. All right. So the wavelength gives you the distance between the planes. So if you know g, you know that there are planes with interplanar distance a. So let's now take another point on the same line. So this one. This g vector will also give you a plane wave, but this time the wavelength will be a divided by 2. So the wavefronts corresponding to that plane wave are given here. So you have the same as before, passing through the lattice points, but also you have some additional wavefronts in between here. So in fact, what this represents is the second order of diffraction in that direction. So it's a m equal 2. Remember, for the Laue condition, for example, you have delta k r equal m2 pi. So if you have m equal 2, this is the second order interference. It is also the m equal 2 for the Bragg condition. 2d sin theta equal m lambda. So this m equal 2 will give you this. We can look also in another direction, for example, from the origin to this point. So here the wavelength will be 2 pi over g equal b, and the wavefronts will be, of course, perpendicular to g, so there will be these red lines. So they are separated by b, which is the lattice constant in this direction. We can take another vector, for example, this one, the origin from this to this point. So here it's just a little bit more complicated to compute the wavelength, so you will get this number. So this number is the distance between the wavefronts in this direction, given by g. So the wavefronts again are perpendicular to this vector, and this distance is given by the wavelength computed here. Alright, so a few additional important points here. First one is one point in the reciprocal lattice, so a 1g vector, represents in fact an infinite set of planes, okay, via this plane wave defined by the k vector g. And this contains all the points of the direct lattice. So you see in this example that all the red lines connect all the black dots. So this is one property of the reciprocal lattice. The shortest vector in one direction will give you planes crossing all the lattice points. Another thing is that you see here that if you want to define a set of planes, you only need to define one vector g. Indeed, one point is equivalent to an infinite set of planes. All these planes can be represented by just one vector in the reciprocal space. And in fact, we need to give a name to the planes, so we can discuss which planes we are talking about. So for example, this set of planes, they are called, in fact, according to a system called Miller indices. So we are going to discuss these just soon. But here I want to show you that this system is in fact coming naturally from the reciprocal lattice. So let's look at this g vector. So its coordinates in the space is 2 pi over a, 2 pi over b. But what we usually do is that we normalize in this direction according to this number. So this would be 1, and this would be 2, etc. And same in the other direction. So this is 0, this is 1, 2, etc. So the coordinates of this point is 1, 1. Okay, 1, 1. And it turns out that this set of planes is named 1, 1. 1, 1 are the Miller indices for this set of planes. So you can see actually that if you take this point, you see that this is your unit cell in the direct space. So this could be A1, A2. And you see that actually this plane crosses the first axis at 1 also, the coordinate 1, and it crosses the second axis also at 1. So this is 1, this is 1. Okay. So, but we are going to discuss this again. So what we have just discussed can be put in nice words. The theorem. So if there is a family of lattice planes separated by distance d, and n is a unit vector normal to the planes, then the vector given by g equal 2 pi over d n is a reciprocity vector, and so is the same with integer m here. So m is a diffraction order. The converse is also true. If you have a reciprocal lattice vector g1 and g is the smallest of these vectors parallel to g1, then there exists a family of lattice planes perpendicular to g1 and g and separated by distance d, where d is 2 pi over g. So of course you see here that reciprocity vectors are natural choices for the classification of crystal planes. So let's define here the Miller indices. The Miller indices of lattice planes are the coordinates h, k, l in the reciprocal lattice of the shortest reciprocity vector g, h, k, l normal to that plane. Okay, so now we will planes will be defined by their Miller indices, and usually we use this set h, k, l for the letters, typical letters used for this. And the distance, so distance for this plane, so for this set of HKLs will be 2 pi over g, again HKL. So a comment, these Miller indices depend on the choice of primitive vectors, and they are integers that cannot have common factors. So the shortest vector. So in fact we can also find the Miller indices directly from the direct lattice without even knowing about the reciprocal lattice. So there is a simple algorithm shown here, so just 3 steps. We take the example shown here. So find the intercepts on the axes in terms of the lattice constants a1, a2, a3. So in this case, for this particular plane, it crosses this line at 1, this line at 1, 2, 3, and the vertical axis at 1. So we have 1, 3, 1. Then take the reciprocal of these numbers. So 1, 1/3, 1. So this comes from the reciprocal lattice. Reduce them to the 3 smallest integers to obtain the index of the plane HKL. So you multiply by 3 to get integers. So this plane is the 3, 1, 3 plane. If you may get negative numbers, and this is fine. So in that case, you just have you just put a bar on top of your number. Right. So in general, you refer to planes as HKL like this. These are examples of usual planes, the typical ones for the cube. So this one is a 1, 0, 0. So indeed it crosses this axis at 1, and it actually does not cross the y-axis and the z-axis. So in mathematics it is the same as saying that it crosses at infinity. So if you take the reciprocal, so 1 divided by infinity, you find 0. Therefore you have these zeros. Here you have so 1, 1 and 0, and this is 1, 1, 1. We define families of planes. So if you look, for example, at the 1, 0, 0 here, so this is one face of the cube, but actually this face, all the faces of the cubes are equivalent. So we refer to all these planes just with one HKL number, and we say we are referring to the family of these planes. So in this case you may refer to all these planes as 1, 0, 0 family, and we use in such a case the curly brackets instead of just the conventional brackets. So same story for all the planes. For these ones are equivalent also, so it would be the 1, 1, 0 family. Less obvious, but still true. These planes are also equivalent, so these are the 1, 1, 1 family. So while we are at discussing these, let's see how we name directions. So it's very easy. The direction of vector r of the direct lattice is specified by 3 integers, such that this vector is just n1 a1 plus n2 a2 plus n3 a3. So if you are looking at let's say this direction, so from the origin to this, so the intersection of the direction with the unit cell, this intersects the unit cell at 0, 1, 1. So this is the 0, 1, 1 direction with square brackets. The direction from the origin to this point will be a 1, 1, 1 direction. Notice that the direction may not always be from the origin. So if you take this direction from this point to this point, this is 0, 1 and a -1 in the z, so it is a 0, 1 and 1 bar direction. Okay, yeah, the 3 integers must be the smallest choices, of course, because you could take another number, but another point farther away, but you have to take the point intersecting the unit cell. Alright, so another comment: in cubic lattices, the direction HKL is perpendicular to the plane HKL, but that's not true in general. As with planes, we also have families of directions. So if we have equivalent directions, equivalent by symmetry, you can refer them to as n1, n2, n3, and with a kind of triangular brackets in this case. So the example is, for example, the 1, 0, 0. So it's this direction is equivalent to this one, equivalent to this one, and in other direction too. So all these are equivalent directions, and so you can just say refer to these directions to as just 1, 0, 0. Okay, let's come back to planes. So there are different ways of writing equations for some planes. So if you take this plane here, so we have an XYZ frame. We have a normal n with these coordinates. That line intersects the plane at these coordinates, and this is just any point in the plane. So one equation is this one. We'll come back to that in the next slide. At school you probably used this one, and in our case, remember in the algorithm we were using intercepts and then reciprocal. So in fact, so this would show the three intercepts of the plane with the frame xyz here, and in this case you can write the equation of the plane like this, with a prime, b prime, c prime being the coordinates here of the intercepts. So you see the reciprocal aspect of the equation, which comes from that algorithm. We find the intercepts and then take the reciprocals. Alright, so let's now show that the reciprocal lattice vector G, which defines the planes, is perpendicular to these planes. So it is if it is perpendicular to two non-collinear vectors in the plane. Alright, so let's look at a situation corresponding to what we are talking about. So let's in this 2D situation, we have a direction A1, direction A2, we have these planes in red, and they, of course, the intercepts are 1 over h for this one, 1 over k for this one. So in fact, if you take A1 divided by h minus A2 divided by k, this is a vector along in this direction, along this line. Okay, and you can take other vectors also in 3 dimensions, and you just take G scalar this thing, and you show that it is equal to 0. Alright, let's see now the interplanar spacing. So we can use again this drawing, and together with the Hessian normal form of the plane. So this is the same definition as we have seen in the previous slide, the first one. P is the distance from the origin, so it is the interplanar distance in our case. So let's take this drawing. We will in fact apply this, but using this particular drawing. So the distance between planes is in fact the distance between this point and this point. And this is just, you take this vector, A1 divided by h, and scalar product with a unit vector in this direction. Alright, so this is it. We get this, so this is a unit vector along G, so it can be built as G divided by the modulus of G. Alright, so now we can, what is A1 scalar G? By definition, so G is of course H is HA1 plus KA2 plus LA3, and you know, by using, if you come back to the third definition of the reciprocal lattice, you will see that A1 scalar G in this case is just 2 pi h. Alright, so in this case h disappears and you find 2 pi over G, as we said before. Let's look at the particular case of the cube. So we have of course this is general, and for the cube we get this for the distance between planes. So again, always refer to a set of planes as HKL. So let's move now to diffraction. So what kind of electromagnetic waves do we need to study crystals? So you know that the diffraction phenomenon occurs if when the typical distances of your system are of the same order of magnitude as the wavelengths that you use. So you have studied diffraction and interference in optics, and so for interference, for example, if you have two sources of. So let's look now at the relationship between the reciprocal lattice and Fourier transformation. That is, in some sense, let's move to a general equation to lattice for the amplitude of diffraction. So the charge density in one dimension for a one-dimensional chain, for example, so it's a 1D lattice. Because it's periodic, we can write it like this. And because it's periodic, we can expand it in a Fourier series. So this is what we get. So here we get, because of the periodicity, lattice constant A, the harmonics in the Fourier series are the n times 2 pi over A. So we can write this with complex numbers. So now instead of from 1 to infinity, we sum from minus infinity to infinity of the plane waves, like this. So we have the harmonics n 2 pi over A, and 2 pi over A is in fact the magnitude of the reciprocal lattice vector. So we have ng coming here. Notice that rho star of minus n equal rho n, so that rho is real and not a complex number. So what this means is that in fact the reciprocal lattice vectors are just the set of k vectors that are allowed in the Fourier space. This is a consequence of the periodicity of the direct lattice, and we in fact already knew that. It is the same statement as the Laue condition. What is new in this here is that rho n here represents the weight of this plane wave. Okay, so this is a value that is attributed to each reciprocal lattice point. So it will be related to the intensities of the peaks that are observed in an X-ray experiment. Let's take a simple example illustrating this Fourier transform. So we have here in one dimension a real space, so lattice constant A. You have the reciprocal space, lattice constant 2 pi over A. So you could imagine that your density of electrons is given by a simple exponent sine waves, like this. It would be a cosine, in fact. And so in the Fourier space, this corresponds to, in fact, let's say 2 points. Okay, this is the negative one because we have complex numbers. So you have at 0 you have the offset. So the offset is 2 indeed. It is centered at 2. And this is just the first harmonic because you just have one frequency, just one sine wave. You may have a more complicated density, still periodic function. And looking at the Fourier space, you notice that we have, of course, an offset at 3, which indeed is this point. And we have two contributions this time, two harmonics. Therefore, this is the sum of two sine waves. So you can see that, in other words, you can see that we have here many points, of course, in the direct space, but we can in fact characterize or manipulate all these points. In fact, it is an infinite set of points by just one or 2 points, just a few points in the reciprocal space. So mathematically, it is quite useful. So these drawings are from the Hofmann books. So we are going to look at different points in the reciprocal space. So we call it space because it's a set of points. Like the direct lattice, we sometimes call it direct space. So these are the points in the direct space, and we are going to look at a few points in the reciprocal space. So we define the origin here at 0. Let's now write the diffraction condition in a slightly different way. So we start with the Laue condition, which says that k prime minus k is a reciprocal lattice vector. So we can rewrite k prime equal g plus k. We take the dot vector product of k prime on itself, which gives this. Okay, so this squared equal k prime squared, but because k prime squared is equal to k squared, we just write k squared. Then we develop this. We get this 2kg, we get a g squared, and we get also a k squared which disappears with this one. Okay, so in other words, we get this. Okay, we can always replace g by minus g because both are reciprocal lattice vectors, so it doesn't change a thing. So this is in fact another statement of the diffraction condition due to Laue. So we will see that this is useful in a short while. Let's here show the equivalence of the Laue and Bragg conditions. So we will start from the Laue condition, which is this, and we should arrive to the Bragg condition, which is this. So we are going to look at this situation in 2D. So we have these planes according to Bragg, containing these atoms, and separated by distance d. So these planes are defined in the reciprocal space by vector g. So you have, according to Laue, you have a constructive interference if k prime, so k prime would be in this direction, minus k equal g. And okay, so looking at this, we need to find out lambda and other parameters from this. So lambda will come directly from k because k equals 2 pi divided by lambda. Then we have to see what g is. So g is related to these planes separated by d, therefore g equal n times n integer 2 pi divided by d. It is a reciprocal lattice vector. Okay, so we can replace k and g in this, and also we calculate the scalar product kg. So kg, you will have a cosine, and then which will become a sine theta appearing. Okay, so if we replace, so k is 2 pi over lambda, g is this, and then you have a sine coming from the dot product. And therefore we have shown the equivalence. So this slide is very important. We are going to see the significance of the Brillouin zone boundary and the connection with the diffraction. So here we have represented in 2D a reciprocal lattice. So these dots are points in the reciprocal space. This is the Wigner-Seitz cell in the reciprocal lattice. Therefore, we call it the first Brillouin zone. This red vector here, this is a reciprocal lattice vector, G. And from Laue condition, so Laue condition is this, assuming K is an incident wave. So we get a diffraction if K satisfies this equation. So the game is, what is K? Which K's gives, in fact, a diffraction? Okay, so we can rewrite this like this. We just divide by 1/4, and we get this. So geometrically, let's look at this, what it means here. So we have half of g. Half of g, let's say this is the origin. It is therefore this distance. This is half of g. And this, so half of g, okay, we have squared here. So here we already have half of g. Okay. So the dot product of k with this should also be half of g. Therefore, the vector k, so the projection on this line of vector k must lie here. It means that this vector k from the origin here must have its end at the Brillouin zone boundary. Alright, so this is another statement of the diffraction condition. So this is written here in red. The surface of the Brillouin zone consists of just those k vectors for which Bragg reflection occurs, which consists in another statement of the diffraction condition. All right. So now, why is it that important? In fact, you see that it doesn't matter what kind of waves are involved. Here we have X-rays, which are electromagnetic waves. So we'll get interference of these waves, but it could be any kind of waves. Or any kind of matter waves. For example, you know that in solid states we sometimes talk about phonons, plasmons, polaritons, solitons, whatever ons. Okay, so all these are so-called quasi-particles, but also they have a wavy behavior. So they behave like waves at this scale, and like electrons, actually. Electrons behave like waves at the atomic scale. And in fact, electrons will be scattered at the Brillouin zone boundary also. And for example, the scattering of electrons will lead to the existence of band gaps in solids. So band gaps are important, for example, in semiconductors, in insulators. All right, so you see the importance here of this Brillouin zone boundary. Okay, so this is the last slide. This is just a summary of the different statements of diffraction condition. So we have first the original Bragg condition. We have the Brillouin statement. We have the Laue formulation. So we have two types. You can say k prime minus k is a reciprocative vector, or this relationship. We also have the so-called Laue equations. So A1 delta k, which is g in some sense, equal to pi m, and same for all the three vectors. So this can be related to the third definition of the reciprocal lattice, the equations that there are in that third definition. So what this means, in fact, is if you look at one equation, it defines a cone, because A1 is known. You can decide your m's as you want. So this will define, so delta k has to be on a cone centered on A1, and this will just give you the projection, the amount of the projection of k, so the magnitude of k. So delta k, which is usually what we are looking for, because it's k prime minus k, lies at the intersection of three cones. One cone centered on A1, another cone centered at A2, and another cone centered at A3. Okay, so this is written here. All right. Thank you for your attention. I hope it is helpful. You may check my other videos on X-ray diffraction. So in fact, I have a long video on X-ray diffraction, which would come just after this one. It would be best to watch it after this one. It's about the structure and form factors and application to cubic systems. Also, I have some videos about powder diffraction and in particular the discussion of Ewald sphere. So I would say the best would be to view this particular video, that one today, then these ones, and then these ones. All right, thank you.